Hey everyone, it's Mrs. McCorder here. I'm working from my makeshift office desk area to bring you a brief lesson on Chapter 12, T-Test for Dependent Means. I am joined by one of my fur babies who is asleep and another one who is roaming around here. So the example that I'm going to use to go over how to compute this is in relation to the extra credit that you guys some of you did. I think about 17 of you completed it. So we're going to go over that example, and that data that we collected from you guys, we're actually going to be using for this week's assignment. And so I'll be posting that probably tomorrow. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. So we're going to start by following the same steps that we've been following. And I've kind of written them out here by hand. I did them by hand so I could show you how I actually calculated everything by hand. Okay, so in your assignment, we're gonna follow the 8 steps. And the first step is to write your null and your research hypothesis. So my research question, I don't have it written here, but it was basically, can mindful meditation have an impact on, and then I had 4 different things that I measured. For this example, I'm focusing on bodily tension. So my question for these hypotheses would be, does mindfulness meditation have an effect on students' bodily tension? And so the null hypothesis is going to obviously state that mindfulness meditation will have no effect on my students' bodily tension. My research hypothesis is going to say mindfulness meditation will significantly decrease my students' bodily tension. Now pay attention here. In decrease, this is going to be a one-tailed hypothesis, which is going to become very important when we look for our critical values. So that'll come later on. Step 2, P is going to be less than 0.05. Step 3, we're going to use a t-test for dependent samples because we have one group who's tested 2 times. So that one group was you guys, and you took a before measure, measuring, in this case, bodily tension, and then you practiced a 10-minute mindfulness meditation, and then you were tested again a second time, measuring bodily tension. So I wanted to see from time 1, which was before the meditation, to time 2, after the meditation, did meditation have an effect on your bodily tension? So I coded it. So for those of you who did it, you saw these 5 options where you could pick for your bodily tension. Were you extremely relaxed, somewhat relaxed, neutral, somewhat tense, or extremely tense? So I coded it in this way. So when you see the smaller number here, it means the person was more relaxed than the higher number, meaning that they were more tense. And so this was the data. So I coded each of that. So each of these pairs here represents one person. So this person, before the meditation, they were somewhat tense. After the meditation, they were somewhat relaxed. So we definitely did see a decrease in tension. So each of these pairs of scores represents one person. So this person was somewhat tense before the meditation and then extremely relaxed after the meditation. So I just coded that as such so we can actually calculate the data and answer this research question. And so in total, I have 15 data points that I worked with. And so that's what this here stands for. So this first column here, this is what I call time 1, or the before measure. So if you participated in this and you answered whether you were extremely relaxed, somewhat relaxed, all of these, I coded them. So that's what each of these numbers stands for. So the 4, again, someone who is somewhat tense beforehand, somewhat tense beforehand, neutral beforehand, and so on and so on. And each of these pairs here represents that one person. So this was person one's right here, scores before and then after. And so after, we see a decrease in most people's responses. So that's what these two columns are. So this is time 1 before, this is time 2 after the meditation. Now, if you look at the formula, it's asking us to find something called the sum of D. We have n, the sum of D squared. And so n is the sample size, or the number of pairs. In this case, I have data for 15 people. So even though we have 30 data points, because we have a before and an after score, that still equals a total of 15 pairs, or 15 in our sample size. So that's why in this case, n is going to be 15. Now it asks also for d and d squared, the sum of d and the sum of d squared. So what that is d is the difference. So if you look at each of these, 4 minus 2 is 2, 4 minus 1 is 3, 3 minus 4 is negative 1, 4 minus 2 is 2, and so on and so on. You go down through the list of pairs, subtracting time 1 from time 2, making sure that it's from the same participant, and this is what I got. And so at the end of that, I want to sum all of these up, and if I do so, I will get a sum of 21. So that would be my sum of D. Sum of D, again, I have my little cheat sheet over here. Sum of D is going to equal 21. Now for the last column, it's asking for the sum of D squared. So what I'm going to do is take each of these individual D's and square them. So 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, negative 1 squared is going to become positive 1, 2 squared equals 4, 2 squared equals 4, and so on and so on. And then we go all the way down, and we want the sum of all of those squared values, and that's where we get 49. So here we have n again is 15, because we have 15 people in the sample. Our sum of D, or sum of the differences, was 21, and the sum of D squared was 49. And so at that point, all we have to do is plug those values into the formula. So we have T equals, and then remember the sum of D, we're going to put 21 right here, and then it's going to be divided by the square root of, oops, I forgot to do that here. Look at that. I made a mistake. This should say 15 minus 1. Okay, so we plug in these values. N is going to be the 15 times the sum of D squared. That's this one, the sum of D squared, 49. So 15 times 49 minus the sum of D in parentheses squared. So pay attention to this. We're using the sum of D, 21, and then squaring that. We're not going to take the sum of D squared, the 49, for right here. We're going to take the 21 and square it. And then for the denominator here, it's going to be n minus 1, or 15 minus 1. And so if we go down the formula with that, this is what we end up with. So 21, 735, which is what you get when you multiply 15 times 49, 735. And then when you take 21 and square it, you get 441. So I'm taking 735, subtracting 441. And then my denominator is 14, which came from the 15 minus 1. And so then we can come down here. We can see 21 divided by the square root of 294, which is what you get when you subtract this, divided by 14. When you take 294 divided by 14, you get 21. So now we have 21 over the square of 21. When you take the square root, the square root of 21. When you take the square root of 21, you get 4.58. So now we're left with 21 over 4.58, which actually equals to 4.58. So this is our t value. This is our obtained value that we want to know compared to the critical value. So this is step 4. So step 4 is to calculate all of this, which is what we've done here. That's what this looks like. Now for step 5, we need to determine the critical value. So in order to determine the critical value, you're going to come to your textbook. Sorry, trying to do this with one hand. You're going to come to your textbook, and if you have an older, the 5th version of the book, it's going to be on page 371. We're looking for the t values needed for rejection of the null hypothesis. Now notice we have one-tailed test and two-tailed test at the top. So this is the first place we want to start. So if you recall, my hypothesis was one-tailed because I am hypothesizing that mindfulness meditation will help reduce bodily tension. So I want to focus here on this column or this section. And then degrees of freedom. What are our degrees of freedom? If you guys recall, this is our formula for degrees of freedom for this type of t-test. Oh, I have cat hair everywhere. That's what happens when you have 2 cats and a crazy dog. So, okay, so n minus 1, this is our degrees of freedom. So 15 minus 1, 14. Our degrees of freedom are going to be 14. And now, lastly, we have 3 different options here. This is where we chose for step 2. We chose P being less than 0.05. So we're going to look at this column here. P less than 0.05. So if you take 14 for the P less than 0.05 column, this is going to be our critical value, the 1.762. That's going to be what we're going to compare our obtained value with. So for step 5, we determine our critical value based on our hypothesis, which was a one-tailed or directional hypothesis, by our degrees of freedom, which was n minus 1, 15 minus 1 in this case was 14, and P less than 0.05. So our critical value was 1.762. For step 6, we compare our obtained value, which was this, with our critical value. Our obtained value, if you remember, was 4.58, and our critical value was 1.762. Obviously, our obtained value is greater than our critical value. So because of that, because our obtained value is greater than our critical value, we have to reject the null hypothesis. And so what that means, this is how it would be stated if you guys were actually reporting it, which I want you to do for this assignment. So this is how we would report our findings here. Mindfulness meditation significantly decreased my students' bodily tension. And then we have T, that's the test statistic that we use to calculate. 14, our degrees of freedom, equals 4.58, comma, P was less than 0.05. So what this means is that there's a less than 5% chance that any difference between before and after bodily tension was due to anything besides the mindfulness meditation. So the takeaway from this is that mindfulness meditation can significantly reduce your bodily tension. So that's this particular example. For the assignment that you guys are going to do, I'm going to give you some other values to work with. And I'll probably have an example here in the slides. Where is it? I'll probably use this example so you can kind of even like at least copy along at least the null and research hypotheses. I'll probably be looking at muscle relaxation for the assignment, obviously providing you with different numbers. So just to kind of reiterate, for this week's this week's assignment, you're going to be following these 8 steps that we've done with all the previous assignments, just using this different data that you guys did for extra credit. So I hopefully have cleared up any concerns or questions that you have regarding this chapter, or how to quantify the data, how to actually find your t-values, your answers. If not, please email me with any questions that you have. So again, I hope you guys are doing well, and I look forward to hearing back from you and reading your assignments. Thank you.